here to talk about knowing our worth, but the word I want to talk to you about first, because I think it connects everything that we do, is power. Right? So let's just think about power first, because, you know, and this week we've had the Lord's vote in response to Jasvinder Sangera's sexual harassment case against Lord Leicester. And that really brought home to me what power is, and when you've got it and when you haven't. And, you know, we think about power in terms of representation, and we do a lot of work on that in terms of women in Parliament, women in local government, and we will keep pushing on that because that's fundamental, getting women in there to make those decisions. But what we saw in that case was the real kind of closing ranks of the powerful and an institution effectively ganging up against a woman who has used a process that was the accepted process to challenge what she had experienced. And she'd been backed up by that process, and yet still that institution knocked her back, said no. And we had his friends lining up to vote in support of him. Now, how can we have a system that permits that? So, you know, we've got a long, long way to go till we realise equal power. And if we have equal power, we won't have that happening in our elected or unelected chambers, our sort of modern so-called democracy. So thinking about representation, we've done a lot of work on representation this year. And our Strategies for Success research showed, this is our MP's research, showed not only are there still barriers to women coming into politics, but they meet active resistance and discrimination. And this presents us with real challenges, because obviously we've got to try and change all of that, but we're also saying to women, come and stand, come and be part of it. So I don't want to invite them into a system that's going to actively resist and discriminate against them. I want them to come into a system that's going to welcome them in. And so it's a challenge for us to try and change that system while also bringing more women in at the same time. And we've also had the sexual harassment story, obviously, in the Commons recently with Laura Cox's investigation there. So we're always riding this kind of two-horse message, which is problematic sometimes. But we're at it again on Wednesday. We've got 300 women coming with their MPs to Parliament on Wednesday. 50-50 have been the lead organisers, and we're a partner in that project. And it's to get women to come and be part of the change, because that fundamentally is the only way we're going to do it. Thinking about power in terms of money and financial independence is another really key theme for Fawcett, and obviously we're going to come to the equal pay discussion in a moment. But I just wanted to think about this concept of equal value, because sometimes, you know, we often hear that people struggle with it. They don't understand equal value. They don't get how you can have two different jobs and rate them as equal. But, you know, the concept of equal value was first aired in the Treaty of Versailles, right? Just after 1900, I can't remember the exact date. But the Treaty of Versailles, so they got it. They got the concept of equal value, and they wrote it into that. And yet still, we're struggling with it. And we've got jobs that women do that are just not valued equivalent to men. And it's not because the jobs aren't valued, it's because the women aren't valued, right? So knowing our worth and getting that realisation, getting others to recognise and know our worth, is fundamental to driving that change. We know the gender pay gap has got many causes, and as Fiona's already mentioned, discrimination is definitely one of them. And I think what we've been concerned to do recently, and again aided by Carrie's case and by Sam's case, which you're going to hear a little bit about in a minute, is to really bring that home, because it's very hidden. It's very difficult to both prove a discrimination case, because you've got so many hurdles to go through before you can realise justice anyway, but also you just can't get to first base because you haven't got the information, you haven't got the data. How can you challenge if you don't know what your colleagues earn? And at the moment, the system we have doesn't open that up. Despite the progress of gender pay gap reporting, which forces employers to look at themselves, it doesn't give you the information which enables you to challenge. So we've still got a major problem with the lack of transparency on pay. And it's not just about equal pay, it's also about low pay. So we know women are overrepresented in low-paid work. We know low-paid work is disproportionately part-time. And our economy is actually structured on low-paid part-time work. It's a feature of the UK economy more than it is of other European economies. And we still have a minimum wage that isn't rated at the living wage rate. So if you're at the bottom, you're trapped in low pay, and then you're dependent on the interaction with the benefits system, which we know at the moment is also failing women. So Women's Budget Group research has shown that women have been disproportionately impacted by austerity, BME women in particular, and they're also particularly disadvantaged by welfare reform and universal credit, with single parents quite hard hit too. And then we've had the poverty rapporteur's remarks yesterday that UK government policy is penalising the poor, actively making it worse. So thinking again about power, we've also got to think about access to justice. So our sex discrimination law review highlighted some gaps. We're pushing for change on that. And one of the key areas that we want to change, which is difficult because it's a radical change, is about the balance of power between the organisation and the individual. So at the moment, we predicate our laws and our equality entitlements on the individual's rights to challenge. We don't want to take that away, but we want to put more emphasis on the organisation's responsibilities to prevent discrimination and harassment in the first place. And we're getting support from the AHRC on that, and also from the Women in Equalities Select Committee. So we think we may be getting somewhere in progressing that, but we have to keep that focus to try and shift the balance between the two. Now, looking ahead, I just want to switch our focus now to equal pay, because we're going to have a really fascinating discussion. You're going to hear from our keynote speaker, Carrie Gracie, in a minute. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the backstory to Carrie's donation and how we ended up running this new service with Yes Law, which I have to tell you, we are already getting inquiries into. We're already getting women coming through that service. We've been going for a week. So I'm really positive about that. And I urge you to please spread the word. We've got a lot of work to do to really make women aware of that service. So, and we're not trying to substitute the role of trade unions, by the way. We recognise that trade unions have an important role, and we will signpost women to unions, and we will always say join a union. But there are many women who are not in trade unions and who don't have access to that support, so we do have to help them. It's aimed at women earning 30k a year or less. So we're aiming it at low-paid women and trying to help those who are less able to challenge. So going back to the point about how we got here, I remember having a meeting with Carrie and also then having a phone call with her afterwards where she told me that she wanted to do this. She wanted to make this donation to Fawcett. And I have to say, I was in a state of complete shock when she told me how much it was and she told me what it was going to be, because this is transformational stuff for us. In fact, I don't think in the history of the Fawcett Society we've ever had a donation as big as this. So I can tell you one single donation. And as Fiona said, it's really fundamental to join up individual advocacy with campaigning, because it makes you stronger. It informs your policy work, it informs your campaigning activity. The two knit really well together. But we're not trying to change who we are. We're working with Yes Law, our experts who are here in the audience. They're the expert advisors. It's a partnership, and that's the best way to take it forward. And it's a settlement service, because that is how we can help women to negotiate with their employer and avoid the chaos that is our legal system at the moment, and a dysfunctional legal system it is at that. So, Carrie, I just want to echo what Fiona has already said. My heartfelt thanks to you, and it's been a real joy, not only getting the money, but working with you has been such a joy, because you're such an inspirational woman. And, you know, if there's one bit of evidence to a select committee I could urge you to watch, it's Carrie's testimony to the DCMS committee, because she completely bowled them over. She was so convincing and compelling, and it's because she's been so clear that this is about the principle of equality and justice for women. It is not for her about the money, although it is every penny of it she was entitled to keep. It's about that core principle, and that is what we're fighting for, equality and justice for women, and we will keep fighting for that. And I can tell you, we are going to have a bigger 2019 and a more successful 2019 than we have had a 2018, and that is saying something. So, Carrie, I'm going to introduce you now. Come on over and speak to us.
Expected this morning to be like this. I thought that I didn't realise it was a kind of love-in. Thank you all so much. That was a lovely welcome, though. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so it was interesting hearing what Sam said and Fiona said, and, you know, it bubbled up a couple of thoughts in my mind. the PowerPoint about the House of Lords issue over the past week. I just want to reference that because on the day that I went to do my oral evidence at the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee in late January, that was just after I published my open letter, long before I'd actually won equal pay. And in the midst of that, it was quite a moment because obviously, some of you will remember there was quite a lot of energy coming off BBC Women at the time in terms of support for the equal pay movement. And I had this pendant, says on it, well, you can't see it, but it says, I stand with Carrie, hashtag I stand with Carrie. And it was given to me by other BBC Women. And you will also possibly remember, tweeted on the 8th of January, I stand with Carrie, on the day when I published my open letter, because the point was, it was a Me Too moment. It was an individual statement, but it was an individual statement of a systemic, embedded, pervasive problem. And by grouping around me and protecting me from consequences, and by standing up alongside me, we made a big point. And obviously our management didn't really like that. So the hashtag I stand with Carrie became a big problem for BBC journalists. And we have impartiality rules, and management made it clear that any use of that hashtag in future would bar people from doing interviews or any presenting on this subject. So obviously for BBC journalists, impartiality is core and compass of who we are, and therefore people had to pull back from. So you will see over the past, since January, BBC people have had to be very much more careful about what they say, and that is one of the reasons why you won't see as much wind in the sail publicly of the BBC Women movement as you saw back in January. Because of that kind of pressure. But coming back to the House of Lords at the moment, we were in Portcullis House, me giving evidence and a lot of BBC Women with me on that day, on the 31st of Jan. And it was a moment when, power seemed to be in the balance, because obviously there was the established power of a large, lawyered-up corporation which knew how to game, equality legislation, knew, frankly, that it didn't need to take the Equality Act seriously, and was quite happily resisting all the attempts by individual BBC women to make their case on equal pay. And then because of the open letter, and then because of that parliamentary inquiry, power just trembled for a moment. And there was a scene which encapsulated it in my mind, where I had given 2 hours evidence alongside Michelle Stanistreet of the union, of the National Union of Journalists, and then we had a brief loo break, and luckily the loos were working. I was running up the corridor to get to the loo, to get back into my seat behind the BBC delegation when they were giving their evidence. And as I ran up the corridor past people like Miriam O'Reilly and all the great BBC women who were there, I won't name them because it will get them into trouble, but you can see the pictures if you look back on that day. Swept down upon us came the BBC management delegation, Tony Hall, Anne Bulford, Fran Unsworth, and the chairman, David Clementi. And it was like, and all their support team, and it was like a papal delegation. And there was a kind of moment where we crunched in the middle of the corridor. And it was kind of who's going to kiss whose ring, because me and the badass gang had kind of taken over for the day. And you could see that they were feeling a little uneasy. And the whole tone of their oral evidence was much less complacent and clubbable and comfortable than normal, because they were really sweating. And they were sweating because the emperor had no clothes on. And it was clear to everybody in that hearing that the emperor had no clothes on. And the parliamentarians said it. And here's the rub, and this comes back to Fiona's point about Millicent Fawcett and the fight that goes on from the age of 19 to the age of 71. After that day, the 31st of January, it all went downhill from there. Because where does power reside? Really, establishment power. It resides in the corporations, in the law as that game is played, and in each of our hearts, and in the fact that they control our jobs. So at the end of the day, I would say, at this point in time, that we haven't won. You know, it makes me very angry. And, you know I need to be as patient as Millicent Fawcett to see it as a long game. That, you know, if I started it at 55, well, how many years is that, Fiona? Do I have to kind of 19 to 71, what's that? That's 50. So I would have to be kind of 106 or something before we get equal pay. It's just not good enough for me. I'm not happy to see this go on. It is an unacceptable situation in our country at the moment where women are, I mean, it just makes me so angry even to restate it. I've done a lot of thinking about it recently because I'm now writing about it. We don't have really any weapons, or not many. We don't have information, as Sam pointed out. You know, how do you get to the bottom of whether you're being paid equally? I have to tell you that at the BBC, most of us have tried very, very hard. We are committed, curious, persistent, truth-telling journalists. We had a union on our side. We had a regulator asking questions of the BBC. We had not one, but now 2 parliamentary committees asking questions. We've had media attention. We've had so much. And yet I have to tell you, we're not winning. And the reason for that is because women can't extract information, which is a key weapon in equal pay. You can't extract information until you get to the point of disclosure in a case, which is a long way down the road in terms of access of justice to a dysfunctional justice system. And there is no serious sanction on the employer. Do you know, I was really struck, and I think a lot of BBC women have been struck by how little, employers know about equal pay or about equality legislation. I mean, it's like talking, when you talk to, I don't want to be too mean about the HR team at the BBC, but it is like talking to a dodgy car dealer. They know they've got a faulty vehicle, and they're trying to sell it to you, i.e. sell you the message that your pay is actually equal, by which it's not pay parity, but by which, in my case, for example, it was justifiable that the North America editor was earning nearly 100% more than me. It's fine, Carrie. You know, it's because he X, Y, Z, you know, all these reasons that justify why you're going to pay that person more. So when you face a dodgy car dealer, and they're telling you this, it's like you need to know something about vehicles. You know, you need to be signaling to that dealer that you are not going to be sold, you know, the vehicle that's going to break down in 5 minutes. Or in this case, a story that simply doesn't stand up, that disrespects you as a person, that disrespects your contribution in the workplace. So, what do we have to do? We have to make employers liable. There has to be a cost to them for breaking equality law. There's currently no cost. I mean, almost no cost. We have, and we're about to hear from Sam Walker, who just this week won her case at tribunal. It's 3 years' work. What's it cost the co-op, who discriminated against her on grounds of sex, who paid her unequally, and who dismissed her unfairly, as a court has now found? It's cost them, well, it's going to cost them by the time down, as Sam will tell us more, but not enough, definitely not enough, because it's not going to hurt them hard enough. There needs to be in this country either access to information for women in equal pay cases, much earlier, inside the internal process, immediately, and or there has to be some serious sanction in terms of financial cost and reputational cost. If there's no reporting of these cases, then there's no reputational cost. If there's no punitive damages or no injury to feelings, then there's no financial cost. They're just paying you back the money they actually owed you anyway. That's all they're paying you. And, you know, when you think about this, I want you to be very angry, because if you have to go down this road, you will have been undervalued in the first place for however many years you've been underpaid, and then you will be doing an entirely unpaid second full-time job to try to put that right. And women were doing that in the 80s and the 90s. Why are we still doing it today? We're doing it today because regulation has gone backwards. We're doing it today because the unions are not doing the job. They have lots of problems, there's lots of reasons for this, but they're not effectively running group cases, not nearly enough of them. Employers just don't need to care. So, I have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. I want to treat you as a bit of a focus group. How many of you know that your pay is equal? Actually know that your pay is equal, hands up. So, it's hard for me to tell exactly how many that is. I mean, that's quite a few, I'd say. How many of you don't know that your pay is equal? See, I'd say that's more. Yeah, that's more than half of us. How many of you have challenged your pay on equal pay grounds? Oh, impressive. We got the right focus group here. Good for all of you, because that's not an easy thing to do, as I know. How many of you have fought an equal pay case? That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Well done to all of you, because I know from looking at it, didn't do it. I won mine internally in the end, but I had to look hard at fighting it externally, and I take my hat off to all of you. So, how many of you have followed the reporting of an equal pay case in tribunal in the past year? That's a good number. How many of you not followed the reporting of an equal pay case in tribunal? That's a bigger number. Now, I'd say that's not your fault. I'd say that the media are not covering those cases. And that I'd say there's a public education problem about equal pay. It's embedded, it's invisible, no one really wants us to see it, or not enough people want us to see it. The other thing is access to justice. Only highly paid people really can afford to go for individual cases, or really, I don't want to say only, but there are very few people other than, you know, highly paid women, like me or like Sam, who can afford to consider taking a case to tribunal, and Sam has, and she'll tell us about it. And that is because, you know, it is so expensive. When I was looking at this at the beginning, I was talking to, I mean, the BBC, which is funded by your license, it buys the best lawyers. It gets completely lawyered up. And you, if you're going to take it on, you have to think about having the kind of lawyer who can go into battle against a big corporation, like the BBC or like the Co-op. They only buy the best to fight you, the lone woman. So when you're looking at that, that's going to be £500 plus VAT, you know, in London or something like that. That's why we need Emma and her team at Yes Law, and that's why we need this equal pay fund, because we need to provide legal education to those who are being discriminated against, and we need to help them to solve the thing internally, to tell the dodgy car dealer, no, actually, I don't think that's a fit vehicle. You know, Emma and co at Yes Law have explained my legal rights to me, and as I understand it, my situation is thus. And when an employee can start talking to their employer like that, the picture changes, the story changes. I went through 5 or 6 different conversations along these lines about what constituted equality in terms of my pay, and it was only right at the end that I won equal pay internally. But it was by holding firm and by having a great pro bono lawyer, legal advice, which enabled me to say, that's not right, and I'm not having it. So I think it's great that we've got the service. I'd really be grateful if you could all get out and support it and proselytise for it. That would be That would be brilliant, because then we can have employment advice for those and access to justice for those who can't otherwise afford it, without hopefully going to law, without hopefully going through what Sam has gone through. I'm just going to pause because Sam's going to come up and we're going to have a little chat so that you can hear what is involved if you have to go that route.
Okay, I'm just going to introduce Sam Walker, so you know who she is and a bit of background to Sam. So Sam is a Fawcett member, first and foremost, has been a Fawcett supporter for some time, and she has been fighting an equal pay case against the Co-op group. She's the former chief HR officer at the Co-op, and she was there during the time when it was going through that rescue period when the Co-op was in crisis. So she played a very pivotal role in all of that. So Sam and Carrie are going to have a conversation about Sam's case. And I just want to say, at Fawcett, we've been offering moral support. We haven't been able to offer any financial support, I hasten to add. We've been offering moral support to Sam and together with Carrie. And I think her case does illustrate many of the points that Carrie has already highlighted. So she had a major victory yesterday, which was announced, which you may have seen. And, having sat through some of that tribunal hearing, I can tell you, she really did wipe the floor with them. They were terrible. And it was a joy to be with her because she was so hot and so professional about how she did it. But by God, it was a full-time job to get that ready. And, there were 9, 10 lever arch files of evidence. It was just a massive task. She had a great brief, etc. I won't take her thunder in talking anymore. But Sam, we pay tribute to you. You've been brilliant. Massive inspiration, and thank you for fighting it. And there are so few women who get to be able to do that, which is why we have to support this Equal Pay Fund and why we have to have this service. So anyway, I'll hand over to both of you. There you go.
I'd just like to add my congratulations. Amazing. So, Sam, why? Why did you take this all the way?
I felt, as the most senior woman at the Co-op, that I had absolutely no option but to. If I hadn't, I would have been turning my back on all the other women there. And having gone through the Co-op crisis, I was responsible for putting in a new grading system. And as that grading system rolled out, it became blatantly obvious there was a problem throughout the organisation. Blatantly obvious. And because I was in the position I was in, I could see that. Now,
So
if I hadn't taken it the whole way, no one would have known.
The problem. Tell us about the problem.
The problem fundamentally was that at every single level as that grading came out, the top of the grades were populated by men and the bottom of the same grades were populated by women. And the Co-op, like many other organisations, has published its gender pay gap. That's an indicator. That's an indicator in itself. But I absolutely fundamentally could see people in the same roles, women and men in the same roles, where the women were paid less than the men.
And why?
Why were they? Historically. Absolutely historical. So I was part of a team that went into the Co-op to rescue the Co-op. We inherited that. But I can tell you, Carrie, and I hate to say this, I've got 28 years worth of HR experience. When I was 19, I was a staff records clerk at the BBC.
Oh. Two values-led organisations.
And when you're a staff records clerk, you see the staff records. It has always been thus. I think it's a socially accepted norm, even in today's society, unfortunately.
So you took it all the way to make a point.
Yes.
And explain the point. So is that the point, that it's socially acceptable that it needs to change?
Yes, I think it is. I think it is the point, because I know we've got a select committee looking at this. I know we can tweak the law, we can change the law. But if the only course for redress every single time is to go to tribunal, my grievance alone, like yours, took a year internally. Co-op's grievance process allows for 10 days. There's no repercussions when they decide to let it run a year. There's no repercussions when they promise to do an audit as a result of your grievance and then flatly refuse to do so. There are no repercussions for them flouting their own policies, their own procedures, and then you're left with the legal costs of going to tribunal. I can tell you now, they were more worried about the grocery ombudsman, or whatever it's called, coming in and fining them for their treatment as suppliers. Or you mention the pensions regulator, and they all jump, because the fines can be imposed. There's absolutely nothing when it comes to equal pay.
So they don't fear the regulator?
They don't care. They don't feel the regulator at all. They don't care.
Yeah. So when you said to them, and only tell us what you feel able to tell us, but when you said to them, well, you've got this problem,
Yep.
and you were still inside,
Yep.
and you're the boss of HR,
Yep.
and therefore they should listen.
Yes. They said, we're reorganising the company and HR's not going to be on the exec anymore. So I fought that, and I fought that for 3 months, and in the end they said, no, HR's not going to be on the exec anymore. So I finally went off sick. I was very ill by that stage with the stress, and 4 days into my sick leave they sacked me.
So let's talk about what it cost you personally. What has the experience been like?
It's been horrific. It's very, very isolating. Very isolating. They put out an announcement internally that I was off for family reasons. They knew that I had a disabled child, and they allowed all the other employees at the co-op to think that I was off because my daughter was hospitalised. I wasn't allowed to say anything. I was effectively gagged for 3 years.
And that was gagged actually by your own lawyers,
Yes.
who didn't want to annoy or offend or in any way kind of colour the judge in the employment tribunal.
Yes, that's exactly the advice you get from the lawyers, is don't do a Carrie. Basically, sorry, don't do a Carrie. Because it's trial by media and it will influence the panel. So you're gagged. You're gagged to former friends, you're gagged to former colleagues, you're gagged to the public, you can't talk.
So then the company can say what it likes, you feel you can't say anything,
Yes.
and then 3 years on, you get to court, but what happens in those 3 years? What's it like for you being inside that experience, apart from the isolation?
Well, you're not paid, so I had no income. We remortgaged our home on this. I used all my savings on this. I think if I hadn't had such a good network of friends and people who responded when I reached out, and Sam included, I would have folded. And I had just such a good network that kept going, keep going, keep going. This is really important. After 28 years of being in HR and being referred to as the used car salespeople, reputationally, I had to make a difference. You know, you get a kicking when you're in HR, like you do if you're in IT, quite frankly, but, you know, what was 28 years for if at the end of it I walked away and I didn't say anything and none of those other women at the co-op were aware there's a problem? What did that really achieve?
Do you think they can become aware of the problem now? I mean, I was shocked this week. I know it's been a big Brexit story this week, but I was shocked that this story, major UK employer, values-led organisation, that we've seen one quite complicated news report on it, and that's it. Do you think you can get that message across to women?
I'm really, really hoping through social media now, because I can't rely on the other media. The Guardian have put it out if you all want to have a look. What happened when I first brought the case is the Guardian brought their report out and then the other newspapers caught up. I'm really hoping this week that happens and then there's further comment.
Did you buy into Fiona's argument about the Millicent Fawcett patients, that between the age of, that by the time you're 71, your story, the impact of the enormous courage that you've shown and the sacrifices that you've made and the risks you've taken that the impact of that will have paid off for women in this country?
It needs to. It's why I did it. It absolutely has to. I mean, that's why I'm working with you and Sam. I'm going to collaborate with the whole fund thing, because as a senior HR professional, boy, do I know the tricks in the book. You know, I think I won a lot of my case because I screenshotted various conversations and text messages between me and colleagues and my CEO as evidence. You can't go into this not being prepared.
Yes, so it's worth pointing, just in case anyone has a company phone and anyone's going into an equal pay fight with their employer, that company phone may go black, like Sam's did. You know, one day it's just black. And so if you're having conversations by text with your boss that are relevant to your pay or your value or your contribution, perhaps it's a good idea to follow that advice, screenshot it.
Yeah, I had to. So this has to make a difference. Whether I can't control the press, I would love to make a big splash, but there's too much Brexit noise out there. I'm going to be relying on social media, on all of you forwarding that message, of all of you talking about that, because more women need to come forward and be brave. It's easy for me to say that. I was a highly paid executive with an incredibly supportive family who were happy to remortgage the house on this. I will be lucky, and I'm being very, very honest, I will be lucky to break even.
After 3 years of full-time work.
I do not walk out of this with mega bucks. Doesn't happen.
So,
I will break even.
So given the enormous costs involved, and given that not everybody has a supportive family to see them through, and, you know, to Toby, where's Toby? To see them through. What is your advice for everybody in this room on equal pay if they're in doubt about their own pay, if they're advising a friend or a member of their family?
I think get your facts straight and get all your evidence together first, so when you even start to have that conversation with your employer, you are armed. Now, it's very easy for me to say that because I was senior and I had access to that information, and that's where the law does need to change. But you have to be forearmed. I remember our conversation when you were going, do I, don't I, before you and Tony reached your agreement. If you've got the information, if the employer has any sense of reasonableness, which I hate to say it, the BBC must have done to at least gone that far and not gone legal, because you had the information to go legal, Karen, and they didn't need to. I tried that and I failed. I had to go legal. I asked 4 times for an equal pay audit. It was even agreed to by Lord Adebowale in my grievance hearing, and then turned down afterwards by Hazel Blears. You know, if I can't turn to people who are ex-MPs and in the House of Lords and ask them to make reasonable requests.
So yes, so that, but the message is, it's extremely intimidating, it's extremely costly, it's very damaging to your future. Why would anyone go there? Let's just put our heads back in the sand.
Because we'll never get change. And forget being 71, we'll be dead. It just won't happen. It just won't happen.
So, Sam, well done again. Thank you so much.
I'm really pleased you did that. Thank you. So I think she really bloody deserved that. So, Sam, thank you so much for speaking about it. Right, I'm going to invite our panel to come and join us now. So we've got Julie J. Charles, Catherine Meyer, Joe Swinson, Gillian Keegan, and Carrie. We're going to have a panel conversation. I'm slightly looking blankly because I can't see a couple of our panellists, but someone go and find them for me if they're not in the room. Oh, here they are. Right. Fantastic. Joe, coming up. Gillian, coming up. While they're coming, I'm going to plug our new calendar. Everybody, hello. Susan Pears. Where are you, Susan? Susan is our picture researcher and has done loads of work researching the images for this new calendar. You'll remember last year we did one about the centenary of women's votes, and we had some fantastic suffrage images. This year we've got Pioneering Women. Brilliant, brilliant stories and images in here. Please do go and buy it. All the money we make comes back to support our research and campaigning work. And a big shout out to Hinali, wherever she is, who's done all the kind of design and stuff on it too. So please do go and support that. And buy your equal pay badge as well, obviously. Right, so we're going to have a panel discussion now. There's going to be plenty of time for you to ask questions, but I've got a few to kick us off and to give our speakers an opportunity to just give their reflections, really, on the theme, which is equal pay and knowing our worth, and particular focus on the workplace. So I just want to introduce our panel, because they're all wonderful women, and we're very, very lucky to have them all. So I'm going to go this way along, just because I'm left to right kind of person. Jaye Swinson, who is the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, is a great ally of Fawcett in Parliament, I have to say. I'm glad you're going to be back very shortly, Jaye, from maternity leave. And we're going to be fighting for that proxy voting baby leave entitlement very, very soon. Then we have Julie J. Charles, who is an equalities campaigner and expert, and she's an advisor to government, she's a campaigner, she's got years and years of experience, so we're going to be hearing from Julie in a minute. I'm going to skip over you, because we've heard then we've got Catherine Meyer, who is on... Meyer, sorry. I always call you Meyer, sorry. Who's going to be telling us about her equal pay fight, I think, actually. I really want to hear about that now. You've said you've done that. Who is just one of those really inspirational women who are out there sort of disrupting and challenging and leading the way. And then we've got... And then we've got Gillian Keegan, who's the MP for Chichester, and she is also a great ally of Fawcett, and she's really helped us with our local government work. She co-chaired our local government commission, which has been really influential work, actually, driving the LGA to make some changes as well. And she's, during that period of time, I wouldn't like to claim credit, but maybe it was because she was associated with Fawcett, became the MP for Chichester. So welcome. And she also co-chairs the APPG on Women and Work. Now, I've slightly lost my running order, so I'm just gonna let you say who wants to go first. Julie, maybe would you like to go first and just give us your thoughts on the issues about, maybe bring the microphone a little bit clearer, so I think that's it. Just from your perspective on knowing our worth in the workplace and fighting for equality.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Okay, I think let's start with knowing our worth. Personally, I went for many years not knowing my worth, and that started at the age of 17, having founded a nursery because I lived on a very run-down estate in the East End of London, quite deprived community, and a lot of the women on the estate, we didn't know our worth. And some of us that were expectant mums had nowhere to actually give us the opportunity to leave our children and go back into employment. It was a really difficult time. So I campaigned with some women. There were 6 tower blocks, campaigned on every door. And this is going back to 1981. In 1983, the local authority gave in and said, OK, then here's some money, and we got some money off Comic Relief. Cut a long story short, we set up a nursery called the Nappy Gang, which is still going now, and it is run by women. It's run by women. Now, until that time, I didn't know my worth. I didn't think that I could do anything like that, because at the time, in the 1980s, it was very much a male-dominated arena. And wherever you went to ask for advice, there was a man. And I couldn't relate to a lot of the men because I was a single parent, and to be honest with you, I hated them at the time. I did, I honestly did, because of my personal experience. However, I went on, I had some terrible experiences with my health, and in 1996, I was in hospital for 9 months, and I came out of hospital. I'd lost all that confidence that I'd gained from the 80s, and I came out of hospital having worked as a child protection officer, and wanted to develop something that I could do to advocate for women and campaign once again, but this time around equality and equal rights, equal pay, equal everything. And I was successful in gaining quite a lot of visibility and recognition from other women that really felt that, you know, they were going through so much discrimination, particularly black, Asian, minority ethnic women, and some of those that were disabled women and women with long-term conditions that did not know which way to turn when it came to being employed in the workplace or not employed. I think that those of us that are employed are very lucky. Even if there are challenges, we are very lucky to be employed. Those of us that are not employed have a very, very, very tough journey. Now, I see that through the organisation that I founded, Equalities National Council. That small group that I spoke about just a minute ago that started in 1997 after I came out of hospital is now quite a large national organisation. We've got 34 staff. We train social workers who are all women, and many of those are from a BME community. And there's a reason behind that, because there are a lack of particularly Asian women social workers. And that's some statistics that I've worked out myself with the Office of National Statistics. And it's really important that we have women on our side when it comes to social justice from all different parts of the community. Now, you're not going to believe this, but I'm going to tell you, because we're all women and we do like a gossip sometimes. But I'm going to tell you something that I don't know if it's that I don't know my worth, okay? But as the Chief Executive of Equalities National Council, I've fought and fought and fought for the last 23 years of the existence of the organisation to actually get a wage, to be funded for me to get a wage. I am not paid as a Chief Executive of Equalities National Council. I am a volunteer CEO. And it pains me that every time our fundraiser puts in for funding, particularly with the government, because we want our services to be mainstreamed, but they want us to be a project. We don't want to be a project, thank you very much. We are not projects, we're human beings, we're women, and we want a woman leader, who is me, and I want to be Prime Minister one day. And I have had to go for years and years and years of really tough financial decisions about what do I spend my money on. I had 2 children very young, one at the age of 17 when I set up the day nursery, and one at the age of 23. One is now a doctor, who's 30 years old, and one is now a managing director and was an ex-professional footballer. I'm not going to tell you his name. Doesn't have the same surname as me, but he's done extremely well for himself, and I'm really proud. They're both married, they're both left home. It's just me and the little dog now. Very happy, and she happens to be a woman. Okay? Her name's Bella. But going back to the subject of pay, now, I think it's not about me not knowing my worth now. I actually know what I'm worth now, and I think I'm worth a whole lot more than what I'm being given the recognition for. I think I'm actually facing discriminatory barriers, and it hurts. It's very, very painful because it's quite blatant. And I sit on a number of APPGs, that's the all-party parliamentary groups on whatever. And I also fought against Ian Duncan Smith. He's my MP. Bang, bang, bang. I fought against Ian at the last election. I didn't win, obviously. Like, you can see he's still there. However, I gave him a bloody good run for his money. He actually said to me, we live in the same constituency as my MP. He's a few roads down from me, not far. And we've had coffee together. I don't agree with what the man has done, but we have had a coffee together. And I've told him that, and he would like me to work with him on stuff around social justice. But I've said that I'm unsure about that. I would like to work with a woman on social justice to make it women's justice. And he is very happy to kind of fund something like that. But I don't want the funding to come from Ian Duncan Smith. I don't want Ian Duncan Smith or any other male-dominated... sorry for taking up a lot of the chat. But I don't want to have a logo that says .gov.uk, and .gov.uk for me is white, middle class, suited males that fall asleep in the House of Lords, Houses of Parliament, pretending they're listening where the microphone is on the red and the green couches, pretending they're listening, but they're really not. And I, one day, would like to be funded and paid to take the work I do, not just on the local level, because we advocate for about 1,800 people a year. So it's not just on the local level, it's on a national level. But now, my next venture is a global one, whereby I am looking for investors to invest in women that would like to become aspiring entrepreneurs who can go out to different walks of life, countries, arenas, wherever, and feel that they don't have to do this trudge, 9 to 5, on the tube, in traffic, getting stressed, all of that. They don't have to do that. They can go to another country, third world country or not, set up a woman's group, a woman's network, do something that actually supports women from the grassroots level in those countries and leave a legacy, leave some form of legacy for those women so they've got something that they can hang on to and women that they can relate to. Because right now, if we think we're suffering, my God, out there, they really have it bad. I've travelled, and it is tough out there. It is really tough. And so, to end in what I'm about, I think that there's two things. I think it's really important that as women in this room, that we really do need to think outside of the box. We really need to think big, that you do know your rights and that you do know your self-worth. And like Fiona said, around advocacy and justice, that is such a big, big thing. And we really do need to have it at the forefront of the you know, our vision, our thinking, our minds. The whole thing boils down to advocacy, looking after each other, looking after others, and justice. And that's it.
Julie, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Right, I'm going to move to Catherine now. Catherine Mayer. I've got it right. Give us your take on it, Catherine.
Well, I think it's worth saying that in 2015 I did two things early in that year. The first one was that I co-founded the Women's Equality Party. And that was in March. In April, I left the job that I had been in for 11 years at Time magazine, and I launched legal proceedings against my former employer for sex and age discrimination. So it was the whole shebang. It wasn't just equal pay, it was sex and age discrimination. Both of those things have moved along considerably since then. I'm happy to say that I reached an amicable resolution just a couple of months ago. And in terms of the individual impact, it's really worth returning to that in a minute. But the founding of the Women's Equality Party was really because of recognizing a whole host of things that have already come up this morning. The systemic nature of this, the power imbalance nature of this. This is so important, what people have been talking about here. I had, as I rose in journalism, believed that in making progress, in rising high, that I was blazing a trail that other women could follow. And then I turned around and I saw exactly the same things happening to other women. I understood my own impotence even when I was Europe, Middle East and Africa editor of that magazine. I could not really substantially change the content, which is another point I would like to come back to here, particularly because Sam was talking about the difficulties of getting coverage for her case. And I also understood that because of that systemic nature, we had to do things that tackled it from that viewpoint. So it's really obvious when we're talking about equal pay that we will never get equal pay, we will never get equality in the workplace until we also have equality at home. We will never get equality until we have equality in the education system. We will never get equality until we manage to reduce this extraordinary toll of endemic violence against women and girls. We will never have equality until we have equal representation. So all of these things needed to be addressed, and I had been, as a journalist, covering politics very closely for a very long time, and one of the things I'd seen also raised this morning was that there are really excellent women in actually, I was going to say all of the parties, I might exempt a couple of them there. I haven't noticed an excellent woman in the DUP recently. But But I have always known Tory feminists. I have, admired Jo for such a long time. Fiona, I knew when she was a Labour MP. There are great women there. And they are often let down by their own parties. And that is why I felt it necessary to create a separate party that would be focusing on this. And I really hoped would help the women in the other parties as well and put forward a collaborative way of doing things and really focus. I said we won't get equality in the workplace until we get equality at home. It is all around care work, the undervaluing of care work, the failure to invest equally in social infrastructure as well as in physical infrastructure. We have the most expensive childcare in the OECD in this country. It is so obvious that if we invest properly in universal childcare, that will actually generate growth, that will pay for itself very quickly, but it will also get rid of this thing that makes the gender pay gap so incredibly difficult to resolve, which is the thing that says that, oh, well, I can't stay home and look after the children if I'm a man because I'm earning more than my female partner. So it's this vicious circle we have to break. We have to have properly, fully invested parental leave. Now, another thing that the Women's Equality Party campaigns for is equality in the media. Very close to my heart. I really want to salute Carrie. I think what she has done is absolutely amazing. I salute Sam as well. I also know what this feels like. I'm going to try not to get emotional. The thing about this is it doesn't just affect us as individuals, it affects the output. The media is a reflection and of the society that it occupies, but it also reinforces when it could challenge. Carrie said something interesting too about the need for impartiality, that is something baked into the BBC. It is, but unfortunately so is false balance. The number of times I am invited on Equal Pay Day to debate whether the gender pay gap is real or not, with usually somebody very lovely and very young who has not yet realised that the gender pay gap opens up at the age of 30, by the way, whether you have kids or not. And that it is far worse for women of colour, women with disabilities. That there are so many things that we need to talk about, that we need to do, that are concrete things, like on gender pay gap reporting. The government's now proposing to have separate ethnicity pay gap reporting. It shouldn't be separate. We need to look at the way these things intersect and intensify. So, for me, those are all really important things. Sorry, I won't keep going on. But in terms of my own lawsuit, which went on, as you gather, from 2015 until just now, I would like to encourage other women to come forward. I sued in the States, which was a different system, and so my case went public whether I wanted it to or not. I was terrified about that because not only is the media riven with all of the problems that it should be challenging, but as you know, it tends to monster women who put themselves in the public eye. I didn't even do it deliberately. Like Sam, I did seek to reach a private resolution and I was denied that opportunity. When my case went public, I thought my world was going to come to an end. I thought I was going to have this big sign over my head saying, unemployable, problem, terrible person, obviously it's her fault, obviously it's her fault. You know what happened? Many other people came forward to say that the same thing had happened to them. Loads of witnesses came forward. The man who was the kind of main architect of my misery actually lost his job 3 days after the story came out. So it was very similar to the Me Too movement. And one of the reasons that when we have to look at the power imbalances, recognised everything Sam said about the problems of and Kerry about talking to HR and the way that you end up gagged. We do need to find ways to get the story out, but it has to be collective action as well, because I was able, I am old, I have money, I could do this. It did threaten my background, my flat. I remember having an argument, not an argument with my husband. I was just going to pay tribute to my husband. and it came out as argument. What I was going to say is, I remember saying to him, if I take this next step in the legal action, we may lose the flat. And you know what he said? Fuck 'em. So I was lucky. I was able to do that. I want us to work together across parties with wonderful organisations like Fawcett, this wonderful initiative that Carrie has helped to fund. I want us to be able to work together to make this change and to recognise its systemic nature and to tackle it that way. So thank you.
Live streaming swear words. That's great. Thank you, Catherine, very much. No, we've got a JFDI motto at Fawcett as well. You can imagine what that stands for. Okay, Jo Swinson, over to you. Please tell us what your reflections are, Jo.
Sure. Well, I mean, when I was Minister for Women, what really hit home to me was the way just all of these different issues are so interconnected. So they often were getting addressed in silos, like you'd have a debate about the gender pay gap, you'd have a separate debate about women's pensions and a different one about confidence of girls at school and a different one about violence. And of course, these are all absolutely intertwined. And that's why in tackling the problem, there isn't some silver bullet. It is about tackling all of it and about people across different industries, different professions, different age groups, all doing their bit to try to make change where they can, because there's just frankly so much to do. And I did feel the weight of responsibility a little bit as the Minister for Women, where you're trying to solve gender equality with or inequality with 50 civil servants and a tiny budget, compared to the other things that I was doing, like consumer rights, which was important in my role as a business minister, but which had far more resource than what was allocated to the gender issues. So but one of the things that really struck me was how invisible the gender inequality is, which sounds like a strange thing to say because we all see it. But even then, the way that we see it, we sometimes say to ourselves, well, I'm just imagining it. Oh, well, no, that obviously isn't really the case. And it isn't obvious quite what the extent of that inequality is. And it can even be surprising to hardened feminists when you actually see those numbers in black and white. And I wanted to share, just as an example, a Twitter exchange that I saw. And it was a couple of people who were in America who were working as editors of people's CVs for a company, Marty and Nicole. And Marty tweets, so one day I'm emailing a client back and forth about his resume, and he is just being impossible. Rude, dismissive, ignoring my questions. Anyway, I was getting sick of this shit when, I can say that now that, Catherine, you've, broken the barrier there. I was getting sick of this shit when I noticed something. Thanks to our shared inbox, I'd been signing all communications as Nicole. So they had a bit of a chat about this, and they decided to do an experiment where they basically, for a week, they swapped inboxes, and Marty signed his messages as Nicole, and Nicole signed hers as Marty. And there'd been a kind of issue within the company where Nicole had been under pressure because apparently she hadn't been working as hard and getting as much done. And anyway, he continues the story and says, I was in hell. Everything I asked or suggested was questioned. Clients I could do in my sleep were condescending. One asked if I was single. Nicole had the most productive week of her career. I realized the reason she took longer is because she had to convince clients to respect her. And I just thought that was, I mean, it was a really nice, neat example of something which we all sort of feel, but it's often hard to put your finger on. It's hard to be really clear that it would be done differently if you were a man, but you kind of get that feeling that it's probably the case. But all too often, it's very hard to prove or to be certain. And of course, for men, even, you know, the very many lovely men who are kind of feminists and equality, they don't even understand the true extent of their privilege in a similar way that, you know, I have to be really conscious of my white privilege and think about that because it's not something which I'm being confronted with every single day. I'm experiencing it in blissful ignorance. So I think that invisibility is one of the reasons why transparency is so incredibly important and why the gender pay gap reporting, you know, again, it's not a silver bullet, but it really has sparked that conversation at board level about something which is crucial. And I think that the pay and the money is important, it's part of the value, but it's also about that respect. And it's about all of those different issues. And the gender pay gap is quite interesting because it is a proxy for lots of things. It's, you know, it incorporates all of that inequality about, you know, mothers having children. And of course, because of the intersectionality of the different pay gaps, you know, again, if you're collecting those figures, you can start to analyse the different groups within the workforce as well and see whether there are double disadvantages. And I'm sure there generally are in most organisations. It's a proxy for whether women are being promoted as much or whether they're being, you know, held at a certain job for just a few more years because, you know, they have to prove again their worth and that they would be good, whereas a man is more likely to be promoted on potential. So the transparency really is important because it forces us to confront it, but it is vital that we use that information to ask questions. And that's where I think everybody can do something. We can ask questions of our own organisations, our own employers. People will obviously feel, there will be some people who feel more empowered to do that, and there might be some people in some circumstances where that doesn't feel like something which is that you're in a position to do. But we're also all consumers. So you can also ask about the situation in other companies to whom you spend money at and, you know, do that publicly because that information is out there and in the public domain. And that accountability is important. And I just wanted to say there's two reactions that organisations or individuals tend to have when they're confronted with this kind of, you know, bleak assessment of quite how bad the situation is. And both of them are reactions of horror, and I'm sure Carrie has experienced these and Sam from the different people that they spoke to about their cases. One is of horror as in, oh my goodness, this is what we're doing. This is atrocious. I can't believe this was the case because it is subconscious. It is often unintentional. You know, I do not believe there was a great PwC report into pay equality at the BBC where it sort of said, you know, there is no evidence of, you know, systemic, you know, pay inequality between men and women. I mean, I thought, what are you expecting to find? A little huddle of people in a room somewhere going, how can we pay the women less? That's just not how it works. It is the assumptions that people have in their minds when they're thinking, so what is a fair amount for this person to be paid, that just mean that women tend to get less. It's not some kind of intentional plot, generally. So you have that sort of horror, and how can I put it right, which, you know, it's not great if that problem's there in the first place, but at least if you get that kind of good horror response, then you can make some progress. And, you know, that is something. But then you also get the other horror response, which I think was summed up by John Humphreys and John Sopel's conversation, which, you know, we all heard. And I did just kind of love the schadenfreude of that. As a politician, you're always worried about, you know, microphones still being on. And, you know, sometimes people do get caught out, but there was something just quite nice about that. But it just basically showed, it's that horror of how dare she? How dare she challenge this? How dare she think that she's worth that? Is the subtext of that horror reaction. And there is far too much still of that. And it didn't surprise me that that exists in the BBC. And that BBC Women and the organisation, I think, has been fantastic at really, you know, furthering these issues. But those women journalists who themselves are not always in those positions of power in their organisation and trying to challenge it, but again, getting fobbed off. And so for those kind of dinosaurs, I think they absolutely have to be called out and challenged. And I remember at the time, there was various women MPs saying, well, I'm going to boycott John Humphreys and not go on the Today programme and be interviewed by him. And I just thought, well, do you know what would be even better? is to just go on and to ask him about it. It is live radio after all. What are they going to do? Cut it out? So I'm not expecting to have a very pleasant next interview with John Humphreys. But I do think that challenging is really important, because those attitudes are still prevalent. And again, they are too often invisible because the microphone is not always on. Thank you.
I'd totally forgotten you'd done that. That was brilliant when you did that too. Okay, Gillian, give us your perspective on this issue of knowing our worth in work.
Goodness, I'm not even sure I'm worthy to be here, actually, after listening to some of those. I've had people who've set up, well, 2 of you have fought publicly. 3 of you, actually, have fought publicly for equal pay and rights to be treated fairly at work. And I've had my own personal experience, and I didn't actually think about it, so I was just listening to your stories of how I did get a settlement, and I did negotiate very hard and very satisfactorily, but it didn't help anyone else. And actually what you did, even though you were kind of forced to in some cases, because it is the worst thing I think that can happen, particularly if you've got to a senior level, it's that question mark that people will be asking. So I'm down here as a Conservative MP, but... Oh, okay. There's not many people ask that. Is it on?
It is on.
Is it on? Shall I? I'll just speak louder anyway, okay? I can do that. I've had this happen to me, but I've got much more kind of personal experience of the stories that you have told, as opposed to Joe's in a way. Because even though I'm down here as an MP, I am an MP. I've been an MP for 18 months, but actually I've spent nearly 30 years in the world of business. So most of my experience is out in the real world, and actually it's a great pleasure to get a break from Brexit at the moment, because that's that's what I'm doing next on some news channel or other, talking through the deal, because I think I'm one of the few that actually understands it, having spent all that time in the real world. But it's so I think what you've done is actually quite a game changer, actually. And I think the Women in Work APPG, the work that I do with Jess Phillips, who's the other co-chair, I think we need to put more of a focus on this, because we've started to discuss things like the use of gagging orders, or the use of compromise agreements, actually, to basically pay the money and go basically quietly, which I've done, and actually lots of women I know have done. It's also just struck me how many people this must be happening to, because lots of really brilliant professional women who've reached senior positions, which is the path that we were all on, have had this happen to them. And not many people know about it or even talk about it. So I think we should use this opportunity now to do something different. And I know Jess has done some Freedom of Information Acts, even requests to even find out how many have been used in Parliament, which there weren't all that many, but still I think it's something that we can raise more awareness of, because they are often used to keep quiet. And of course then it doesn't take any further, really. I go away, I go on holiday and, pick myself up, dust myself down, which it says it takes a year or so, at least, because it's very unfair and unjust, and it's a very isolating journey, I think you said, Sam, as well. So in terms of the political point, as Joe said, there's so many underlying factors. It's almost like trying to eat an elephant. But I think the Women's Equality Party has been very useful at focusing, the list of to-dos, really, and you kind of summarise them. And there is so much to do on so many fronts. There is progress, but it's so slow. And I suppose it will to some extent, that's part of the nature of it. But we do need to really, I think, work much more collaboratively together, all of us, to make sure that we to make sure that we get the real points across, and probably prioritise a little as well. I'm kind of, you know, still mostly a business person and not much of a politician, as you'll probably find if you hear me talking about most things. But we do need to prioritise, because sometimes this is such a long list, and it's such a wide approach that it's easy to get ignored or to get picked off. So I think that's something else as well for us to think about, how we just really prioritise and knock down some of these things that have been for a long time, whether it's shared parental leave, whether it's even the corporate culture, whether it's more transparency around when these things are happening coincidentally to women after they're 40, pretty much in the business world. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know what happens, but we become irritating at that point. Maybe it's because we know more, I don't know, but it certainly is a factor. So I think that's probably what we need to do, and I think Fawcett can probably help us with that, Sam, because you kind of, you know, bring us all together. I mean, there's so many different groups trying to address it as well. That's often what I think, you know, again, we've got so many different voices that it's easier to ignore different voices than it is to ignore one strong voice. And I think that's what we need to do, and what we need to do. And you know, certainly I look forward to learning from Jo. She's so much more ahead of me in terms of understanding politics. She's been in politics for 100 years, but a long time. She's done proper jobs. She's done the Women's and Equalities Minister. She's done the job. So, you know, I think, and you know how it works a lot better than I do as well. But, you know, I do look forward to hearing more. However, I am in a good position because I am now in Parliament. I am now a Conservative. They're in government at the moment, and I am brave enough to speak as well. You know, the great thing about coming to politics when you're 50 is, you know, you've not really got the same thing to prove as when you're 30. And, you know, and I am. That's why, you know, we got on from the moment. I'm very happy to take on issues. I'm very happy to listen and understand different perspectives. I always say, even actually talking about this, but, you know, growing up in just outside Liverpool, it's actually the most Labour town in the whole country, and all my family support Labour pretty much, and they all voted to leave. I was the only one who voted to remain, so I've never really had anyone agree with me. So I'm very used to I'm very used to arguing. The only Conservative in Knowsley. I think I've got an uncle who's once voted Conservative. It's a big family, but that's you know. So I think it's. Thank you for inviting me, and you know, I think we've just got loads more work to do, but we need a better plan probably.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much, Gillian.
Thank you.
All right. Collaborative strategization, that's what I'm getting from this. So more collaboration, more strategy, more coming together, more kind of focused, concerted energy. I think that's something we can definitely commit to. Right, I'm going to come to you now for your questions and contributions from the floor. Please put your hand up if you've got a question. We'll take 3 in a go. Okay, we've got one woman there in the red top. Who's got the microphone? Quickly. Thanks. Sorry, I'm going to be hard on this because I want to get the questions. Have you got more than one mic? I hope we have. Oh, okay. Right, you're going to have to run. Yeah. Carry on.
Quick questions. Okay, thanks very much for that. There's a question that I need an answer to, and I'm hoping that you can help with this, because I work in a healthcare sector where pay is calculated on piecework, and there's a 20% pay gap. It tends to be that the women spend longer per patient, but put in the same hours. So how would you counter an argument that they should therefore be paid less?
Okay. Next question down here. There was a hand. Okay, woman there. Yep. And we're going to have to go round the other side. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to raise a broader issue. I'm totally sold on we have to fight on equal pay. I've been involved in 2 cases with my university employer. One was about gender discrimination, which wasn't to do with pay, and recently more to do with pay, which wasn't so much to do explicitly with gender. The first one, I get no trade union legal support because it's subtle, it's difficult to prove, and we're not 50% likely to win. And this second one, where there's numbers, and you can add them up and divide them and subtract them, I get quite good legal support for something that's not nearly so important to me. So I'm clear we need to fight on pay, and pay is a real manifestation of our value. but it tends to be women in high-paid jobs who are able to do this, for whom it's clear it's happening. And we end up perhaps altering the pay structure so we all get the same salaries. And then we're buying into a pay structure which has fundamentally been set up by men, which creates great income inequality, which is bad for us all. And how do we work our way through those things? I think we may have to do equal pay first. But in doing that, I'm feeling slightly uncomfortable that I don't actually want that extra salary. What I want is to be equally valued and equally respected. That's the only way I can demand it, if you like, and that doesn't feel right.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, run round and round the other side. Pass it like a baton, fantastic. Okay, woman at the back with a hand up.
I was going to say we're probably the only two.
It's okay, there's two of us next to each other. So I completely agree with the panel. There's so many interconnected issues when it comes to gender pay, and they need to be done in a structured fashion, but all of them have an impact on each other. I was wondering if there is a opinion or a plan or some sort of suggestion of which issues to tackle first and in what order to have the greatest impact on each other. I'll just pass over.
Okay, for me, I'd like to question at the very core of it, we're not close enough, for us to get equal opportunity or equal rights, we need to do something about how we can access the law or the employment tribunal or anything like that so that we're on an equal footing to the people we're taking on. Otherwise, we will never have our voice heard in a legal way, in a legal framework for that to change.
Brilliant. Okay. I'm going to come back to the panel now. Carrie, do you want to pick up the first point about pay, value, the sort of more systemic questions?
So that is a very difficult, it's a very difficult issue, obviously. And we have, we at the BBC have had a lot of experience over the past year or so of trying to, get through this treacle of somebody saying, well, this is worth more than this, and, we're the boss, so who are you? And you can spend 3 years taking us to tribunal, which you can't even access, so good luck to you. So I suppose in answer to your question about how you deal with questions of value around time spent with a patient, so that your piecework, you're spending longer, you're earning less. I think it's a conversation with an employer, and you can kind of take that out into a lot of different situations. You basically have to discuss, do you value this? On what basis are you asserting value for this person, this apple, this orange, this piece of work, that activity? What makes you, in my case, it was what makes you value Washington, D.C. at twice China? That was just my issue, but your issue, it's actually, for all of us, it's down to a detailed, nitty-gritty, brave conversation about what makes up value, and we all have to do it. I think everybody has to be brave and engage in that conversation. So you're valuing, so you have to know what your comparator is paid, so good, it sounds like you do. So that's step one. And then you have to say, okay, so how are you justifying that gap? Piecework's kind of slightly separate issue for some people, but we all have to go, measure the gap? How do you justify it? You say you've given me some flexibility so I can look after my kids on a Thursday. Is that flexibility really worth paying him double? It's those kinds of conversations. So I suppose that's not a really very useful, detailed answer in terms of the piecework, but I think it's really a hard, nitty-gritty conversation about where the value lies.
Thanks very much. Jo and Julie, do you want to come back on any of those points? What about the kind of what do we tackle first? But what's our priority? I always think that's a really hard one.
Well, I would say that we do need to be tackling everything, and I kind of first. So I would almost throw it back to, I think what an individual should aim to tackle first is the thing that they either care about the most or the thing that they perhaps feel that where they have the most influence over, because that way we can be most effective. So I think it's quite hard to do a hierarchy of, well, you do this issue and then you sort that and then you get this issue, because the issues are so interconnected. And therefore, I think an approach of, choose the thing that really makes you feel passionate and makes you angry and go for that, because you will be more successful in tackling that because you really feel very strongly about it. Or indeed, if you are, an HR director or chief executive of a company, then actually, revamping those policies is probably the way that you can make the most difference. So I think for each individual to look at themselves and say, right, okay, well, where's the bit I'm going to do, rather than feeling as an individual that you have to do everything.
I'm going to go to Catherine next and then come back to you, Julie. Yeah.
I just wanted to come to add to that point on priorities. I agree with what Joe said. I don't think that you can cherry pick here because of the interconnectedness of these things. But I think we also have to ask what we mean by priorities and where they come from. And this is where I'll go back to the media point. We had Sam saying that her story isn't out there because of Brexit, because Brexit is so important, right? Brexit is this big male thing that's so important. Nobody actually talks about Brexit in its gendered impacts. Nobody actually understands what it really is for women. And this notion, this hierarchy of what's supposed to be important, something that those of us in journalism will absolutely know. Wars are important. Stories about social care aren't important. All of these things are important. So what we actually have to do is we have to challenge the notion of what priorities even are, who sets them, who are the gatekeepers for all of this. We need to, this is why we need equality in the media as well as all of these other things, but we have to really understand where this is coming from and call it out for what it is, because, these things are all massive priorities. They are urgent. And the other thing is, we've got to get rid of the idea that this is a conversation about women for women. Yeah. We constantly in this trap of talking about women's issues when they're actually affecting every single person, the whole economy.
Julie, do you want to just come in on, how do we make sure that when we're talking about in those sort of big headline terms that we don't miss out on the needs of BME women, disabled women, younger women, older women? If we're in that challenge, we want to find the common ground and unite together, but we don't want to overlook the differences, because if we do that, then we're not meeting the needs of those different women. So how do we do that?
Yeah. I think that it's very challenging. It's a very challenging area. Just working in that area myself is very challenging for my staff, where they're advocating for Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, disabled people, carers and older people, to access services that anyone should be able to access. Now, one of the things that people are finding extremely difficult is access to employment. And that's even to be employed at the most lowest level as a cleaner, let's just say. And I'm not disrespecting any cleaners, but it is a very low level job. And I just believe, and my staff, I see the challenges for them every single day when we've got queues and queues of people waiting to know what their rights are to access housing, to access further education, to go to a GP and to say that, I don't feel very well, and being faced with a male GP and having to talk about a gynae issue. There are lots and lots of areas that are very challenging to put it all together. However, there is a way, and the way is collaborative working. It's about making sure that we are inclusive, because I think even in the disability movement, there are issues there that's not totally inclusive. In a lot of the black and minority ethnic groups, they're not very inclusive to disabled people. And then we've got BME people that are LGBT, come from LGBT communities. They are being discriminated against. And so I think that if we're going to do anything, firstly, it's looking at the inclusion of all, of everybody, and those of us that have sons, is to make sure that that son grows up as a man that respects everything about a woman.
Okay, I'm going to take another round of questions, I think, and then I'll come to you first, Gillian, I promise, on the next round. So, Tanya, with a hand up, I happen to know Tanya, so I'm going to give her first dibs.
Hi. Great conference, one of the best, thank you. It's a question, it's actually picking off something that Catherine and then Julie started talking about, which is the role of men in this. Because I think it was really interesting, particularly in Carrie's case, that this was set up as a dichotomy in order for you and women in the BBC to get your value, men had to be paid less. And it was made really, really personal. These particular men are taking pay cuts, so because of you. And how do we make it clear that actually the BBC's job was to pay people equally, and it shouldn't always be. It's something that all of us face, not just women. And how do we make men aware of their responsibilities because of about sharing and being open about how much they earn compared to us, and recognising that sometimes there is going to be a loss, but overall it's good for us all.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to come down here now.
Hi, so this is probably directed to Gillian. With the glory of Brexit coming up, Lord help us all, and we're talking about disrupting and challenging, and we mentioned about how Co-op wasn't paying anything and it didn't cost them. To how far should we take it without sacrificing our entire economy and making life terrible for everyone, not just for women? So yeah, we'll get equality, but it's a bad equality because everyone's worse off. So how can we get equality but in a good way and disrupt but with positive results?
Okay, which is kind of connected to Tanya's question, I think. Right, we're going to come round here. Who's got a hand up? Woman here with glasses, and I'll come to you at the back. No, sorry. I will try and get as many of you in as I can, but carry on.
Hi there. I was very touched by what Sam and Carrie were talking about to do with the Employment Tribunal. I've been through it myself. It was a very difficult experience. But I don't see, with all due respect to the fantastic work Fawcett Society is doing, I don't see assisting women to get to the Employment Tribunal as I see it as a cure rather than as a preventative step. And I think, well, this is my question. Does the panel think that as a preventative step, what we need to be campaigning for is a super regulator on equal pay? So do we need to be giving an existing government department some real teeth here to enforce the existing legislation, to impose huge fines? The Financial Conduct Authority comes to mind, a semi-public, semi-private organisation which is funded by its members. It regulates huge financial institutions and ensures that they comply with regulations to ensure the markets operate properly. Should we be campaigning for similar emphasis in the equal pay world so that employers pay an amount to an organisation which they buy membership to, and then those funds are used to push employers into paying people equally?
Okay, brilliant. Right, we're going to come to the man at the back. I'm going to get a man into the questions, and then we're going to come back to the panel. We, of course, do have the EHRC, whose job it is to enforce the law, who need to. Yeah, we need penalties. I always compare it to GDPR and the worry I have about going wrong with data now as an employer. Massive fine, yeah, but nothing equivalent on equality. Yes, carry on.
Hello. As you can probably tell from me, I'm from Scotland. My question is about the equal pay case that Glasgow City Council girls, or bound for that matter, have against the council, and I think that's an ongoing case at the moment. I'm not quite sure where it is in its positivity or non-direction, as the case may be. But obviously, I'm in support of no matter who it is, be it ladies or men, and I wanted to know what your opinions on the Glasgow City case
Put the
was.
microphone down a bit so we can't hear you very well. Yeah, carry on. That's it. Just lower it slightly. That's
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, sorry. I just wondered what your thoughts on the Glasgow City Council, the case
I've got a lot
against.
of thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Not all of them principle.
It's an ongoing case, but I hope it's got a good resolution. But
So you've made a very important point, because there are a number of live big action cases at the moment. We're representing low-paid women on equal value claims. Stephen Cross is a big supporter of Fawcett, and we give a shout out to him. He's put money into us, he's supported us, he's leading on some of those claims. A number of unions are involved in the Glasgow case as well. It's been going on probably over 10 years, I think. It's a very long time.
Yeah, it's a considerable
Jaye
time.
are here as well today. They're representing supermarket women in Asda, a number of others, Tesco, a number of supermarkets. So there are a lot of low-paid women also fighting on equal value claims. Absolutely. I'm going to come back to the panel now, because we're going to run out of time. So I just want us to pick up on the questions about how do we get men to, share the information, bring men with us, don't present it as a kind of zero-sum game. Gillian, let me come to you first, because you didn't get in on the first round.
That's all right. I mean, what they did in the case of Carrie's case was so divisive, wasn't it? It was really designed to be very divisive, and I think that's, that created more of a problem possibly as well. I mean, Tanya, I think, asked the question. I think Tanya knows my own fabulous husband, who is, very much always out there supporting women and women in the corporate world, and has even been, given some awards by it. But there aren't many, and I often think, why is he like that and not like one of the other type that I obviously am surrounded by a lot? And it's because I think he was brought up by a single mum who basically was left high and dry, who basically had to work all the hours God sends to look after him. And that was the story, and that's what he saw, and that was his inspiration. And I think, he's an only child, so he didn't have any sort of double dose of testosterone or anything like that to cope with either. So, but I think it is very important. And I was trying to think of what, the question, what do we really prioritise? What do we focus on? And I think it really comes down to the increase in transparency. And whilst you were talking, Sam, just something I was writing down, we need more transparency, more questions. We have more questions than answers. But we need recourse and regulatory teeth. And I wrote that down when I was sat listening to you over there. And I think, and we need to call out the bad behaviour, compromise agreements being used. Grades, there's so many places for this to hide. Grades, grading schemes, bonuses, piecework, geography in your case, Carrie. And then, of course, we've got the whole underlying drivers of, why women don't necessarily keep on the earning scale that we might start off on, and that's all around parental, shared leave, equality, just, all the fundamental things that are wrong. So I think, I guess we need to have massively increased transparency, and we need to think about the regulatory teeth. I think that's where you focus, because from that flows everything else. Asking the questions about how are these grades structured? No one really asks that. They ask them within companies, but not from outside a company. And they're quite complex, and the more complexity, the more that you can hide behind many, many different things. And I'm sure that's what you found in your job. So I think that's where we really need to focus, how we make it more transparent, and then how we get some ability to enforce afterwards.
Okay, brilliant. I'm just going to work my way along. Catherine.
I agree with all of that. I think also, to go back to that education point and the question around men and where men are. Yes, the point about men brought up in a way that they understand that this is also about them, that that it's better for them as well. I just thought it was worth dropping another rather prominent pay disparity into this conversation rather late in the day. The co-founder of the Women's Equality Party with me is Sandy Toksvig. At our party conference, she revealed publicly for the first time that she had recently discovered that she's paid 40% less for presenting QI than Stephen Fry was. 40%. I haven't noticed Stephen Fry coming out to support her being paid equally. And what I did see was a lot of discussion about whether Sandy was equal to Stephen Fry, that he could have very easily done so. So, you know, I don't know where his head is on this, but I think that there are very easy moments of solidarity that men can show. It would cost them literally nothing to do so. But I do think, as I say, that some of this is baked into our culture in really unhelpful ways. There are great male allies out there, but the really big thing is for men to understand that this is about them too.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. I'll tackle the men one briefly as well. So I think we need to somehow engage empathy from men, and we also need to shame them. Both things need to happen. So I'm grateful to Joe for having a go at John Humphrys, and actually I was very interested in his answers, which were, surprise to me, because he said to Joe, when Joe came back at him on the Today programme, he said that he had written to me immediately after the exchange. That's not how I remember it. He wrote to me after he'd had conversations with management, and management had obviously required him and John Sopel to apologise to me, so they both wrote within the same 5-minute period on the 3 days after the event. And during the same 5 minutes, I got 2 emails, one from John Sopel, one from John Humphrys, and I got a call from a senior manager basically checking that I wasn't going to take it any further. So that's thanks to you, so I think that the men on the value question, the Sandy versus Stephen Fry, it's really interesting how some people just hear value when they hear a man's voice and cannot. I'm not got nothing against Stephen Fry, but I was really interested to see the social media commentary which said, but he's Stephen Fry, as if paying. So she was getting 40% of his 100, wasn't she? So she was 60% less than him, if I remember rightly. Was that it, Catherine? I think it was. Anyway, it was a very big chunk. And it was like, okay, because he's Stephen Fry, he's worth that kind of disparity. And I suffered the same kind of comments about, and I speak Mandarin. I've worked for 30 years. It's a police state. Are you kidding me? To walk down to the railings of the White House? I can do that thing. John Sopel is a great reporter. I've got nothing, one of the sad things about these situations is it pits you against your colleagues.
Yes.
And it was divisive the way it was handled at the BBC, which made that an equal pay dispute does pit colleagues against each other in a really, really unpleasant way. And it's one of the things that puts you off taking it on. And then if the employer makes it worse, that's really tough. So I had nothing against John Sopel. But what I would say about all those top men is they could have done the solidarity thing. Yeah. Could. And they chose not to. And that's why I say it's partly reaching out to get men to empathise, and it's partly actually saying to the ones who don't, do you know what? We're in the 21st century now, and that's not acceptable. Yeah. Yeah.
Julie, give us your take.
I agree with everything the panel said. I just want to know how the toilets work.
There's a resounding yes. We're coming to an end. Yeah, men's and women's. Coming to an end. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Can you hang on for 2 minutes? Yeah. Oh, you're all right. Yeah. Okay. Joe, give us your take to finish us off. Take the microphone a bit closer, sorry.
Yes. I think the Glasgow City Council case really goes to the heart of how men's work and women's work is valued, and that's why it is so totemic and fascinating. And the on the issue of enforcement, therefore, I mean, I would entirely agree that, you know, nobody really wants to go to an employment tribunal, right? I'm delighted the fees have been scrapped, but nobody really wants to go there, because even without the fees, it is costly in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of emotional energy for everybody involved. So sometimes it's necessary and it needs to be there, but I think we do need better enforcement. And actually, I would argue that not just a regulator on equal pay, I would argue that we need to have more proactive labour market enforcement. Having experienced 3 years as Employment Relations Minister, actually the stuff that we did on the national minimum wage, which is the only bit of employment law that is enforced by the state, we were able to create a lot more success, both in terms of serious fines, but also I think perhaps one of the most successful things was we introduced naming and shaming. And certainly for household names of companies, that is one of the biggest sticks that we had. And I think that is successful, and it's a model we should look at more widely for employment law, including for discrimination and equal pay. And then just on the men thing, I mean, I wrote a whole book about gender equality, and I was like, I have to do a chapter on men, because you always get that what about men question. And I started it with this visual of Google searches for International Men's Day. And as you would expect, there's a bit of a spike around about November the 19th. It's on Monday, International Men's Day. But by far and away, the biggest spike every year for searches for International Men's Day on International Women's Day. And if you haven't ever followed Richard Herring on Twitter on International Women's Day, you should start. But, I mean, basically, that what about men thing, I think, it sort of pits men against women. And I think it's not what we need, because I think gender equality is better for everybody. And one of the ways I try to frame that to get men to understand it is I say, look, most gender inequality negatively impacts women and girls, but some of it negatively impacts men and boys. And particularly if you think about the way in which we have stereotypes about talking about emotions and the impact on men's mental health, or if you think about the way in which men's role as fathers is diminished and they are finding it harder to get flexibility in the workplace, for example, and people think that they are pretty useless when it comes to being dads, all of that stuff negatively impacts men and boys. And so if we can join together as an inclusive campaign for gender equality, we will all benefit. And I've found that sometimes gets traction, because I think when you have men against women, we're just never going to win that battle. We have to be working together.
Absolutely. Right. Brilliant. Thank you.